Hello everyone, welcome back to the channel.
Today we're diving into a complex and rapidly developing situation on the battlefield, where Russia's southern front has been thrown into visible disarray after the destruction of its critical land bridge links. The events unfolding there have reshaped strategic expectations, interrupted long-established logistics, and created a moment of unprecedented uncertainty. In this video, we're going to break down what happened, why it matters, how it affects both sides, and what the next phase of the conflict might look like as the southern front loses the cohesion that Russia relied on. The southern region has always been central to Russia's military goals, largely because of the direct connection it provided between mainland Russia, Crimea, and the occupied territories across southern Ukraine. This land corridor supported everything from troop rotations to fuel shipments, ammunition deliveries, armored vehicle transport, and the coordinated movement of reinforcement units. When the conflict intensified, both sides understood that whoever controlled the flow of supplies would hold the real leverage. Recently, however, that balance has shifted dramatically as Ukraine has managed to disrupt, degrade, and in some areas completely sever this logistical pipeline. When the land bridge infrastructure was damaged, including key routes leading toward Crimea, Russia's supply chain was hit with ripple effects that weakened command and control stability. The southern front depended heavily not only on physical roadways, but also on bridges, rail lines, fuel depots, and staging areas that allowed Russian units to receive consistent support. Once these were put under sustained attack, Russian forces began facing shortages of essentials that normally flow without interruption, everything from spare parts to artillery shells. Suddenly, units stationed far from command hubs found themselves running low on key supplies and waiting longer for resupply cycles that previously arrived on schedule. One of the biggest consequences has been a breakdown in timing. In modern warfare, timing is everything. You can have reinforcements, but if they arrive late, the advantage is gone. You can have artillery superiority, but if shells are delayed or distributed unevenly, that firepower becomes unpredictable. That is what is happening now across Russia's southern positions. Units that depend on synchronized operations have seen their coordination weaken, because one side of the front might get its supplies while another is left waiting. This creates gaps in defensive posture, gaps that Ukrainian forces have been quick to exploit. What makes this moment particularly important is that the land bridge provided more than supplies. It provided confidence, a psychological backbone. Soldiers on any front rely on the understanding that their supply line is secure. When that understanding disappears, morale doesn't just drop, it fractures. Reports indicate that Russian troops in parts of the southern line have become increasingly concerned about the reliability of their logistics, especially after repeated strikes on transportation nodes. Some soldiers reportedly fear being cut off entirely, surrounded, or forced into defensive withdrawals without proper support. And morale isn't just emotional, it affects decision-making on the battlefield. Commanders who worry about losing supply routes change how they plan. They may avoid taking risks they would normally take, or they may pull back prematurely. They may hold positions too long, trying to buy time for supplies that never arrive. This hesitation or overcommitment creates unpredictable battlefield behaviors, and unpredictability often leads to mistakes. Ukraine has shown that it knows how to capitalize on these moments. With the destruction of these land bridge connections, another problem emerges for Russia: the need to reroute and improvise. Rerouting supply lines in peacetime is difficult but doable. In wartime, it becomes dangerous, slow, and extremely costly. Trucks and convoys that once had a relatively safe, efficient path now must travel longer distances through more vulnerable areas, exposed to drone strikes, air attacks, ambushes, or missile strikes. The more complicated the route, the more opportunities there are for the opposing side to interrupt it. And when the new routes require ferry crossings or air transport, capacity drops dramatically. You simply cannot transport the same volume of material by air or boat as you can by road and rail. On top of this, Russia must now defend these new alternate paths. They must place more air defenses, more patrols, more surveillance units, and more manpower around areas that were never designed to be frontline logistics corridors. This stretches their resources thin. Every soldier assigned to guarding a convoy or a temporary crossing point is a soldier not available to hold the line or launch an offensive. It's a domino effect that forces Russia to make tough choices, none of which are ideal. Ukraine, meanwhile, benefits from the momentum. When your opponent's logistics begin to crumble, you gain maneuverability, you gain tempo, you gain initiative. Ukrainian forces can choose where to apply pressure, knowing that Russia may not have the supplies or reserves to respond effectively. The destruction of the land bridge not only opens tactical opportunities, but also strategic ones. It allows Ukraine to force Russia into a defensive posture, especially in places where Russian frontline troops were already stretched thin. Another important consideration is how this disruption affects Russian equipment. Modern military hardware is incredibly resource-dependent. Tanks need repairs, artillery needs spare barrels and mechanical parts. Armored vehicles need fuel and maintenance. If the supply chain becomes erratic, equipment on the front degrades faster than it can be serviced. Once vehicles begin breaking down without replacement parts, operational capability diminishes. A tank brigade without functioning tanks is just infantry with heavy uniforms. Then comes the issue of ammunition. Russia's artillery advantage has been central to its operations, especially in the south. But artillery fires consume massive amounts of shells. Without consistent replenishment, artillery divisions cannot maintain the firepower that has been their trademark. Reports already suggest that some southern artillery units have had to ration shells or change firing patterns, a sign that supply irregularities are being felt in places commanders never expected. Even minor fluctuations in artillery output can have disproportionate effects on the ability to repel advances or hold defensive positions. On the Ukrainian side, there is growing confidence. Disrupting the land bridge wasn't just a physical achievement. It was a demonstration of capability, planning, and reach. It shows that Ukraine can strike important targets, undermine deep logistics, and shape the battlefield beyond the front line. This boosts Ukrainian morale and builds pressure on Russia, which must now confront the fact that its secure southern infrastructure is no longer safe. It also affects the international perception of the conflict. Allies watching Ukraine's success may feel more confident in sending additional support, believing it will be effectively used. Meanwhile, countries observing Russia's struggles might question the sustainability of its operations, especially if logistical problems continue to compound. This could alter diplomatic calculations, financial support, and military assistance on both sides. Another effect of this breakdown is the internal pressure it places on Russian leadership. When military leaders and political leaders face logistical difficulties that interfere with battlefield performance, the blame often begins to circulate internally. Commanders may argue that they were not given adequate resources. Politicians may argue that commanders failed to secure infrastructure. These internal tensions can weaken strategic unity, slowing decision making at the top precisely when clarity is needed most.
We also have to consider the geography involved.
Southern Ukraine is a complex environment. Open fields, agricultural zones, rivers, coastlines, and infrastructure built mostly for civilian use, not modern warfare. When the land bridge is disrupted, Russia's forces are forced into routes that are often exposed and difficult to secure. Ukrainian intelligence has become increasingly adept at identifying weak points, detecting convoy movements, and targeting them with precision equipment, especially drones and long-range strikes. This means that any replacement route Russia creates becomes vulnerable almost immediately. There's another layer as well, the symbolic one. The land bridge has been portrayed by Russian leadership as a symbol of stability and permanence. Its disruption carries symbolic weight, suggesting that the occupied territories are not as secure as claimed. This symbolism matters both domestically and internationally. Domestically, it may challenge narratives of control and progress. Internationally, it may shift the perception of who holds the advantage. At the operational level, Russia's Southern Command now faces a problem of prioritization. Which units get supplies first? Which areas receive reinforcement? Which defensive lines are considered most important? When everything can't be supplied at once, commanders must choose which sectors to strengthen and which to risk weakening. These choices can create vulnerable points, and once a vulnerable point collapses, it can trigger a chain reaction along the line. In past conflicts, logistical failures have often preceded battlefield collapses. Whether this will happen here remains to be seen, but the conditions are similar. Ukrainian planners understand this well. They know that one well-timed push in a weakened sector can lead to significant breakthroughs. If Russia cannot move forces quickly due to logistical strain, any breakthrough becomes difficult to contain. This is why the loss of a stable land bridge has implications far beyond a single region. It affects the mobility and responsiveness of the entire southern military structure. Despite this, Russia is not without options. It still holds significant territory, maintains large stockpiles, and has other routes available, even if they are less efficient. Russia's military has historically adapted to logistical difficulties by improvising, repurposing civilian infrastructure, and rerouting supply chains. But improvisation works best when the front line is stable and the opponent is passive. In this scenario, Ukraine is actively looking to exploit every weakness, making Russia's adjustments much more difficult. Another long-term concern for Russia is the wear and tear on its remaining infrastructure. When fewer routes carry more traffic, they degrade faster. Temporary bridges, makeshift repair sites, and hastily constructed ferry ports are not built to withstand continuous military loads. The more Russia relies on these improvised solutions, the faster they deteriorate, creating a cycle in which the logistics system becomes more fragile over time. For Ukraine, the success of these strikes also sets a precedent. If they manage to degrade one vital supply route, they may attempt to target others. Each successful strike increases pressure on Russia and forces it to continue shifting its logistical planning. At some point, constant shifting can become unsustainable. A military cannot operate efficiently when its supply chain is in permanent crisis mode. What happens next will depend on how quickly Russia can adapt and how aggressively Ukraine pushes its advantage. If Russia manages to stabilize new routes, repair damaged infrastructure, and reinforce weak areas, the front may settle into a new equilibrium. But if Ukraine continues to hit logistics nodes faster than Russia can fix them, The Southern Front may face a deeper unraveling. This is why analysts describe the current situation as a turning point. Not because the front has collapsed yet, but because the conditions for a potential collapse are present.
Everything now depends on how effectively each side can act in the coming weeks.
Russia must restore stability to its supply chain, while Ukraine must maintain pressure and continue targeting logistical vulnerabilities. Even if Russia restores partial connectivity, the psychological damage done by losing the land bridge advantage will linger. Soldiers who once believed their supply line was unshakable now know it can be disrupted. Commanders who believed reinforcements would always arrive on time must now plan for delays. These changes alter the battlefield mindset in ways that cannot be easily reversed. This moment also prompts a broader reflection on how modern wars are fought. In the past, battles were won by taking territory. Today, battles are increasingly won by disrupting systems. Supply systems, communication systems, mobility systems. The destruction of the land bridge exemplifies this shift. It wasn't just a piece of infrastructure. It was a system that kept an entire region functioning. Once that system broke, the military stability built around it began to shake. As the Southern Front continues facing pressure, we may see increased movement, redeployment, and unexpected strategic decisions from Russia as it tries to regain its footing. For Ukraine, the coming period will be an opportunity to test the limits of the disruption and see how far the advantage can be pushed. The next developments are likely to be fast, unpredictable, and decisive in shaping the outcome of this phase of the conflict.
Thanks for watching and staying informed.
Let me know your thoughts in the comments. Do you think the Southern Front will collapse further, or will Russia manage to recover and stabilize its logistics?
And if you found this deep dive interesting, feel free to like and subscribe for more updates and analyses.